Welcome everyone to my first times channel. Today we're going to be coding in Python. Python is a programming language. We're going to be creating a Python playlist for everyone to watch. We're going to be creating some projects throughout the next few episodes. We're going to be looking into artificial intelligence. We're going to be looking into machine learning. We're going to be looking into Python integration with hardware and software. We're going to be looking into the Raspberry Pi module and how you can code in a Raspberry Pi module. We're going to be looking into the basics of Python. We're going to be looking into for loops, while loops, do loops. We're going to be going deep into data analysis with Python and some other stuff. But today we're just going to be looking at the very basics of Python. So let's get started. There's four things we want to really talk about. We're going to talk about Python layout. We're going to talk about variables and numbers. We're going to talk about lists, and we're going to talk about strings. So those are the basics we're going to go over today. I'm using the CodeRunner compiler app. CodeRunner is a very useful tool from the App Store that you can get. And it allows you to switch between different codes. So in the future, I might have some C or C++ or Java playlist like this, but today we're going to start with Python, and we're using Python 3. So let's get started. So we're going to look into variables. So we can create a variable called anything. But we're going to create this first variable called x, and we're going to assign it to a number, 5. You can assign anything to a variable, including a string, a list, a dictionary, or whatever. We're going to go into that in a little bit. So let's create another variable. And we can create a third variable. We can create as many variables as we want. And we can assign numbers to them. We can assign lists or strings, like I said. But we can also manipulate previous variables and reassign them to a new variable. Like we can do z is equal to x, and we can do something with x and y, like multiplication, right? So x times y, that's what's going to happen here. But I ran the program and nothing output in the output window, right? That's because we need to output something using the print function. There's two main ways to output something. You can return z, or you can print z, and usually return is what you use with functions and definitions. But like, since we don't have that yet, we're going to talk about the next video. We're just going to use print z, and print z outputs the value, which is 50. We can also do division. We can do addition. We can do subtraction. So when we do division, let's do this. We get 0.5, which is 1/2, right? But we can also do double division, which gives us how many times y divides x completely, right? Like whole division. So 0 times, right? So when you divide 5 by 10, you get a fraction. You don't get a whole number. So you get 0 as your output. But if you do it the other way, y divided by x, we get 2, right? But what happens when you just divide? Right? You get 2.0. So that's the difference. That's the difference between this division and double division, right? You don't get that 0.0. That's because we're talking about whole division right now. What we can also do is we can get remainders, which is the percent sign. 0, we get a 0 as the remainder of y percent x, because x can divide 10 completely with 0 remainder, right? But if we switch it around, x remainder of x divided by 10, or 5 divided by 10, should be 5, right? Because you can't divide it completely, so it's 5, as we can see. So, and then we can also do power, which is multiplication twice. So the multiplication twice gives us an exponential. So x to the exponential of y, which is 5, to the exponential of 10, which is this output, right? So we can do that, and we can also do a bunch. We can import pi. We can multiply pi. We can do some stuff with pi. We can do some integrals and other stuff in future videos. So let's move on to strings, right? Let's create a string. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, right? Let's create another string. Right? We're assigning strings to variables now, right? We can create 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, right? We can convert numbers into strings, right? So that's their data type right now, right? Strings can be integers, numbers, floats, or they can be, numbers can be integers, numbers like floats, but they can also be strings. If you can make a number a string, and you can output it as a string, right? So let's do something with this. So let's add these two strings together, right? And then let's print that. Right, let's see what happens. So adding strings, what happens is you concatenate them. So you combine the two strings at the ends and you create a bigger string. That's what happens with addition. The thing with strings is you can't divide or subtract or multiply strings, two strings together, right? You can only add two strings, right? But you can multiply a number by a string, let's say 5 times the first string, right? So what does that do? It outputs the first string 5 times. It almost seems like it concatenates the first string to itself 5 times. That's what you can do with integers and strings, right? You can't divide a string by an integer or add an integer and a string because those are not common float type, like variable types, right? But you can multiply these to get that. What else can we do? We can do a subset of the string. So we can go from the second element of the string to the 6th element of the string, right? So those are our output, C, D, E, F, right? C, D, E, F. So we went from the second element. But the thing about subsetting is usually when you have a string or a list, Python stores the first element, in this case A, as 0. And then the second one as 1, and then the third one as 2. So the second, when we went from 2, we start at C, not D. That's why, right? And we end at the 6th element. When we do a subset, you don't count the last one. You count everything before the last one, right? So let's go to 6. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 is G. So everything before G is F, right? So we end at F. So we go from C, D, E, F. That's our output. And it's the same thing for a list, right? So we have to keep that in mind. So that's subsetting. You can also just do this. Just go to the 6th element, right? From the beginning. You can do 2, and you can go to the end, just like that, right? So that's subsetting. Let's go into a list now. Let's create a list. 1, 2. Let's start at 0 because we know Python starts at 0. Right. Let's end in 9. Okay, so that's our first list. Let's create a second list. 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15, right? And then now let's create a variable z, and then let's add these two lists together. Let's see what happens. Oh, look at that. So now what happened is we combined the two lists and created a bigger list with every element inside the first two lists inside the bigger list, right? So we go from 1 to 15 now instead of 1 to 9 or 10 to 15. So that's what happened. It's almost like concatenation, but with inside a list, right? So we add two lists, we concatenate everything inside, and we create a bigger list. Can we subtract them? Nope, it'll give an error. You can't divide lists. You can't. Same thing with strings. You can't divide, subtract, or multiply them. You can only add. But again, what we can do similar to strings is we can multiply an integer and a string. So here we have an output of the first string 5 times, concatenate it to itself within a bigger list. Sorry, these are not strings. These are lists. So we get the first list, and we multiply by 5, and we get an output of a bigger list with the first list inside of it 5 times. That's what happens when you multiply. And again, we can do 2 to 6 subsetting of the first list, and we just get a subset. Again, so you get 2, 3, 4, 5. So again, Python starts at 0, 1, and then 2. So we start at 2. Even though 2 in our eyes is the third number in the list, Python starts at 0. So again, it's 0, 1, 2. So we start at 2, and we end at 6, right? 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But we don't include the sixth one, we include everything before the sixth one. So that's why we start from 2 and we end at 5. That's our subsetting right there. And again, we can just subset up to a number, or we can subset from a number to the end, just like that. And that's basically all we need to know about strings and lists and numbers and variables. In the next video, we'll talk more about different manipulations that you can do. Actually, let's look at one more thing. We can do what is called a length. You can identify the length of a list, right? And so that gives us the length of 8. So let's just do that instead. Length 10. You see, it gives you how the length function gives you how long, tells you how long this list is. So you can see we have 10 numbers in here from 0 to 9, and it gives us the length of 10, right? If we just look at the length of S or Z, since we pre-assigned it, right? And we can subset it from 2 to the end, right? And then let's print that again. And we can see that it'll output, see, let's just do that, 8. See, as you can see, it outputs 8. So it tells us that, the subset variable S, which is now assigned to Z, has a length of 8. So that's how you use length. And you can also use length with strings. So let's reassign this A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I. And it tells us the length of the string, which is 9. Right? So that's a useful function, a built-in function in Python that we can use when we're coding more complicated codes in the future. Well, this is all for today, but in the next video, we'll talk more about some useful for loops and do loops and while loops that we can do with Python, and some outputs that we can get, and more, built-in functions that Python has that programmers can utilize, right? And again, we're going to go into more complicated stuff like machine learning, artificial intelligence. We can go into deep fakes and how deep fakes are created. We can go into some audio and visual machine learning. We can manipulate some audio files. We can manipulate audio files through Fourier transforms. We can manipulate some videos and pictures through Fourier transforms. We can talk about that. And we're going to go into some Raspberry Pi Python coding that allows you to integrate with the hardware stuff and allows you to manipulate real world materials and other things that you want to manipulate. We can go into some robotics codes, data analysis for sure, 100%, how to import a data into Python, manipulate the data, and then output. So that's what's to come. And hopefully you can stick around. Please like, subscribe, share, hit the notification bell so you can get notified when new videos are uploaded. Thank you. Have a great day.